Have you ever felt like you're living on a completely different wavelength from everyone around you? Have you ever looked around at the crowd and felt more isolated in their presence than you do when you're actually alone? You wake up every morning and put on the mask. You engage in the small talk, laugh at the jokes that aren't funny, nod along with opinions that make no sense to you. You try to fit in, to belong, to find your tribe. But deep down, there's this gnawing feeling that you don't quite belong anywhere, that you're fundamentally different, that you're walking a path that no one else seems to understand. Maybe you've been told you're antisocial. Maybe people say you're too serious, too intense, too philosophical. Maybe they tell you to lighten up, or just go with the flow. But what they don't understand is that you're not rejecting connection. You're seeking a deeper kind of connection that most people aren't capable of. What if I told you that this feeling of fundamental aloneness isn't a flaw? What if I told you it's not something to be fixed or overcome? What if I told you that this very quality, this inability to find satisfaction in shallow connections and surface-level interactions, is actually the mark of what Alan Watts called the chosen man? Alan Watts understood something that most people never grasp. There are those who are called to walk a different path, to see reality from a different angle, to live by different rules. These are not the outcasts or the misfits. These are the awakened ones, the philosophers, the seekers who have glimpsed something beyond the ordinary consensus reality. Watts knew that the chosen man doesn't walk alone because he's rejected by others. He walks alone because he's chosen a path that by its very nature must be walked in solitude. What he discovered about the psychology of awakening and the price of consciousness will shatter everything you think you know about belonging and connection. After this, you'll never see your solitude the same way again. Are you ready to understand why walking alone isn't your weakness, it's your strength? Then let's begin. In this video, we're going to explore Alan Watts' profound understanding of why certain individuals are destined to walk their path in solitude. Not because they're antisocial or damaged, but because they've been called to something that transcends ordinary human experience. We're going to understand why the deepest insights come to those who are willing to step outside the crowd. This is not about glorifying loneliness or encouraging isolation. This is about understanding the difference between being alone and being lonely, between solitude and disconnection, between walking your authentic path and following the well-worn trails of the masses. We're going to dive into the philosophy of conscious aloneness and why the most awakened individuals throughout history have always been fundamentally alone in their understanding. Let's start with a truth that might make you uncomfortable. Most people live their entire lives asleep. They move through the world in a kind of unconscious trance, following scripts they never wrote, pursuing goals they never chose, living by rules they never questioned. Alan Watts understood that when you begin to wake up, when you start to see reality as it actually is, rather than as you've been conditioned to perceive it, you immediately become isolated from this sleeping world. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unknow what you've learned. You can't go back to the comfortable unconsciousness of the masses. This is what Watts called the burden of consciousness. Once you've glimpsed the arbitrary nature of social conventions, once you've seen through the illusions that keep most people content, once you've tasted the freedom that comes from thinking for yourself, you can never again find satisfaction in the surface-level interactions that occupy most people's lives. Think about your own experience. When was the last time you had a conversation that truly satisfied you? When was the last time you felt genuinely understood by someone? When was the last time you didn't have to translate your thoughts into more palatable versions before speaking them? If you're struggling to answer these questions, you're not alone. In fact, that struggle is itself the answer. You're walking alone because you've developed a relationship with truth, with depth, with reality that most people haven't, and that relationship changes everything. The chosen man walks alone, not because he rejects others, but because he can no longer pretend to be asleep. He can't engage in conversations about nothing when he's consumed by questions about everything. He can't get excited about trivial pursuits when he's grappling with fundamental questions about existence, meaning, and consciousness. This isn't arrogance, it's a natural consequence of awakening. When you see clearly, when you think deeply, when you live consciously, you automatically separate yourself from those who are content to remain unconscious. Not by choice, but by the very nature of what you've become. But here's where most people get confused. They think the solution to this isolation is to find their tribe, to seek out like-minded individuals, to create communities of awakened souls who can understand each other. Alan Watts knew better. Watts understood that even among the awakened, even among the conscious, even among those who have glimpsed the deeper truths of existence, there remains a fundamental aloneness that cannot be bridged. Because consciousness itself is ultimately a solitary experience. You can share ideas, you can exchange insights, You can even find temporary connection with others who've walked similar paths. But the actual experience of being conscious, of being awake, of seeing reality clearly, that experience can never be fully communicated or shared. It must be lived alone. This is why the chosen man walks alone even when surrounded by people who seem to understand him, because understanding is not the same as experiencing. Connection is not the same as union. Communication is not the same as communion. Think about the deepest insights you've had about life, about yourself, about reality. Think about the moments of profound realization or awakening you've experienced. Now try to explain those experiences to someone else in a way that fully captures their depth and meaning. It's impossible, isn't it? This is what Watts meant when he talked about the incommunicable nature of direct experience. The very experiences that make you who you are, that shape your understanding of reality, that guide your path through life, these experiences are fundamentally yours alone. They can't be transferred, only pointed toward. So the chosen man learns to find peace in his solitude, not because he's given up on connection, but because he's realized that the deepest connection, the connection to reality itself, to his own true nature, to the fundamental ground of being, can only be experienced alone. This brings us to one of Watts' most profound insights. Aloneness is not a limitation, it's liberation. When you stop trying to fit in, when you stop seeking approval, when you stop attempting to translate your inner world for others, you become free to explore the full depth of your own consciousness. The chosen man walks alone because he's discovered something that most people never realize. You are your own best company. Not in a narcissistic way, but in the deepest spiritual sense. The entire universe, all of reality, all of consciousness is accessible through the exploration of your own inner landscape. When you're constantly seeking connection with others, constantly trying to be understood, constantly attempting to belong, you're actually avoiding the most important relationship you'll ever have, the relationship with your own consciousness. You're looking outside for something that can only be found within. Watts knew that solitude isn't empty, it's full. It's not a void to be filled, but a space to be explored. When you stop running from your aloneness and start embracing it, you discover that you contain multitudes. You realize that you are not just a person walking through the world, you are the world walking through itself. This is why the most profound philosophers, mystics, and awakened individuals throughout history have always been fundamentally alone. Not because they couldn't connect with others, but because they discovered something far more fascinating than social connection. They discovered the infinite depth of their own consciousness. Consider the times in your life when you've had your deepest insights, your most profound realizations, your clearest understanding of reality. Were you surrounded by people, or were you alone? The answer is almost always alone, because insight, awakening, and consciousness itself are fundamentally solitary experiences. The chosen man embraces this solitude because he understands that it's not isolation, it's integration. It's not disconnection, it's the deepest possible connection to reality itself. But let's be honest about what this path costs. Choosing to walk alone, choosing to live authentically, choosing to remain true to your own understanding, rather than conforming to social expectations, these choices come with a price. Alan Watts was brutally honest about this. The chosen man often faces misunderstanding, judgment, and rejection from others. He's called antisocial, arrogant, or weird. People project their own fears of aloneness onto him, assuming he must be lonely, damaged, or incomplete. The world is not comfortable with those who don't need its approval. Society is threatened by individuals who find fulfillment in solitude, who don't require external validation, who are content with their own company. Because such individuals expose the desperate neediness, the constant seeking, the endless hunger for approval that drives most people's behavior. When you stop participating in the collective illusion, when you stop pretending that small talk matters, that social status is important, that fitting in is a worthy goal, you become a mirror that reflects back to others what they're avoiding in themselves, and most people don't like what they see in that mirror. This is why the chosen man often finds himself increasingly isolated as he grows in consciousness and authenticity. Not because he's pushing people away, but because his very presence challenges the unconscious patterns that keep most people comfortable in their sleep. The price of authenticity is the loss of false connections. The price of consciousness is the end of unconscious belonging. The price of walking your true path is leaving behind those who are content to follow well-worn trails. But Watts understood that this price is worth paying, because what you gain, authentic self-knowledge, genuine peace, real freedom, true understanding, is infinitely more valuable than what you lose. Here's where Watts's understanding becomes truly profound. The chosen man walks alone, but he's never lonely. He's isolated from the crowd, but he's connected to everything. He's misunderstood by others, but he understands himself completely. This is the paradox of awakened consciousness. The more you separate from the illusions that bind most people, the more connected you become to reality itself. The more you embrace your aloneness, the less alone you actually feel. The more you accept your fundamental solitude, the more at peace you become. What's called this cosmic consciousness, the realization that you are not separate from the universe, but an expression of it. When you truly understand this, when you really grasp that you are not in the world, but that the world is in you, then aloneness becomes impossible because there's no other to be alone from. The chosen man walks alone because he's realized that he was never separate in the first place. He doesn't need connection because he is connection. He doesn't seek belonging because he understands that he is the very ground of being itself. This might sound abstract or mystical, but it's actually the most practical wisdom imaginable. When you stop looking for yourself in others, when you stop seeking completion through external connections, when you stop trying to fill some imagined void through social interaction, you discover that you were never incomplete in the first place. You realize that the aloneness you feared was actually the freedom you were seeking. The isolation you tried to avoid was actually the independence you craved. The solitude you thought was a problem was actually the solution to all your searching. This doesn't mean the chosen man becomes a hermit or completely withdraws from the world. Watts understood that awakened individuals can still engage with others. They just do so selectively, consciously, and without attachment to the outcomes. The chosen man learns to distinguish between meaningful connection and social noise. He's willing to engage deeply with those rare individuals who can meet him at his level of consciousness, but he no longer wastes his energy on surface-level interactions that drain rather than nourish. He doesn't avoid people out of fear or arrogance. He's simply become too valuable to himself to squander his time and energy on relationships that don't serve his growth or understanding. He's learned that not all connections are worth making, not all conversations are worth having, not all social obligations are worth fulfilling. This is what Watts called conscious discrimination, the wisdom to know when to engage and when to withdraw, when to speak and when to remain silent, when to connect and when to protect your solitude. The chosen man has learned that his consciousness is precious, that his peace is valuable, that his time is limited. He's not going to sacrifice these treasures for the sake of social convention or to avoid being misunderstood by people who wouldn't understand anyway. This isn't misanthropy, it's wisdom. It's not antisocial behavior, it's conscious choice. It's not rejection of humanity, it's recognition that not all human interaction is valuable or necessary. When you understand this, when you really grasp the importance of protecting your inner world, you stop feeling guilty about your preference for solitude. You stop apologizing for not wanting to engage in meaningless social rituals. You stop feeling obligated to connect with people who don't add value to your journey. This brings us to perhaps the most important aspect of Watts's teaching. The chosen man walks alone, not just for his own sake, but for the sake of all humanity. By refusing to compromise his consciousness, by maintaining his authentic path, by preserving his inner truth, he serves a function that benefits everyone. The chosen man is like a lighthouse, standing apart, shining his light into the darkness, providing guidance for those who are ready to see. He doesn't try to drag people toward the light, he simply maintains his position and allows his example to speak for itself. Throughout history, the individuals who have contributed the most to human understanding, progress, and awakening have been those who walked alone. The philosophers, the mystics, the artists, the revolutionary thinkers, they all shared this quality of fundamental solitude. They walked alone not because they were antisocial, but because they were ahead of their time. They walked alone not because they couldn't connect with others, but because they were connected to truths that others weren't ready to see. They walked alone not because they were broken, but because they were whole in a world of fragmented consciousness. When you embrace your role as a chosen man, when you accept your destiny to walk alone, you're not just serving your own awakening, you're serving the awakening of humanity itself. You're maintaining a standard of consciousness that others can aspire to. You're preserving truths that might otherwise be lost in the noise of collective unconsciousness. Your solitude becomes a gift to the world. Your aloneness becomes a beacon for others who are ready to wake up. Your refusal to compromise your consciousness becomes an invitation for others to discover their own. This is the legacy of walking alone, not isolation, but illumination, not separation, but service, not loneliness, but leadership in the deepest spiritual sense. Understanding why you walk alone is not about justifying your isolation or glorifying your solitude. It's about recognizing that your path, the path of consciousness, authenticity, and awakening, is by its very nature a solitary one. Alan Watts showed us that the chosen man doesn't walk alone because he's rejected by others, but because he's been called to something that transcends ordinary human experience. He walks alone because he's realized that the deepest truths can only be discovered in solitude, that the most profound insights come to those who are willing to sit with themselves, and that the greatest freedom is found in embracing rather than avoiding your fundamental aloneness. This doesn't make you antisocial or damaged, it makes you awakened. It doesn't make you lonely, it makes you complete. It doesn't make you isolated, it makes you integrated with the deepest truths of existence. The world needs people like you, people who are willing to walk alone, to think for themselves, to preserve consciousness and authenticity in a world that often rewards unconsciousness and conformity. Your solitude is not a weakness to overcome, but a strength to embrace. You are not broken because you don't fit in. You are awakened because you refuse to sleep. You are not antisocial because you prefer deep conversation to small talk. You are conscious because you value substance over surface. You are not alone because no one understands you. You are chosen because you understand something most people don't. I want to know, when did you first realize that you were meant to walk a different path? What was the moment you understood that your solitude wasn't something to fix, but something to embrace? Have you stopped apologizing for being different and started celebrating your uniqueness? Tell me in the comments about your journey toward accepting your chosen solitude. The next video is essential for understanding how to find peace and purpose in your aloneness, and why the most awakened individuals throughout history have always been fundamentally alone in their understanding. We'll explore how to transform isolation into inspiration and solitude into strength. Keep watching, because this journey toward conscious aloneness is just beginning. Remember, you don't walk alone because you're rejected. You walk alone because you're chosen. You don't walk alone because you're broken. You walk alone because you're awakened. The question is, are you ready to embrace your destiny as one who walks alone?